Thank you for providing us, the students of the American School of The Hague, a valuable interview on the Nuclear Security Summit of March 24th and 25th, 2014. How important is the NSS for global peace and justice, and what makes the role of the City of The Hague important?
The summit is very important. There is much more risk than we assume and we know about of nuclear material getting into the wrong hands.
And what about The Hague?
Well, for the City of The Hague claims, I think rightly, that it is the city of peace and justice. We have the Peace Palace in The Hague. We have tribunals and courts, the International Criminal Court in The Hague. The Hague is an international legal city, international legal capital. So it was more than appropriate, I think, that such an important summit took place in The Hague.
Yeah. Could you give us a brief summary of the results of the summit? And are there issues you wish the NSS would have addressed?
Is much stricter rules and regulations, so that nations not only voluntarily declare what they have as nuclear material, but that one can devise a structure and a scheme where there is more political force, political weight behind the necessity to make nations do what they should do.
There's been signed a final statement. Which delegations did not comply or did not sign the final statement, and why?
Well, delegations are always free to sign or not to sign.
Among the countries that were agreed were France, Britain, Canada, Israel, and Japan, but notably absent were Russia, China, India, and Pakistan. What do you have to say about that?
They think they are of the opinion that their interests, their national interests, could be harmed by what has been agreed in The Hague at the Nuclear Security Summit. And those are nations you mentioned who have very much their own national interest at stake.
And what about America's influence?
Well, the US is of course a very influential nation, the most influential nation on the globe. This is a US-inspired initiative. It is President Obama's project. One can always say his personal project, and I think he's very right that he embarked upon this whole debate and discussion. He will be disappointed.
What is the role of the NATO in finding a solution for the Ukraine conflict?
That's quite a complicated question you're asking me, but that's what we're here for. There is no direct role for NATO after the land grab by President Putin on Crimea. Ukraine is not a NATO member, and Article 5 of the NATO treaty, as you know, which is an attack against one will be considered an attack against all, does not apply to Ukraine. So NATO will not wage war over Ukraine. But what NATO will do, and what NATO has to do, is make sure that Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin respects for 110% the integrity of NATO territory. And that means that Putin should never set foot in one of the Baltic states, or in Poland, or in the Central and Eastern European members of NATO. NATO has a territory which is sacrosanct for NATO. It is the integrity what this is all about. Would Putin decide, I think he will not do it, because I consider him too intelligent to do that, would he decide to set foot on Estonian or Latvian or Lithuanian or Polish territory? Again, he will not do that. That would mean that NATO would have to react militarily with full force. But that's, and I'm grateful for that as we speak, an if and not a when.
But NATO is a defensive force.
NATO defends its territory. NATO does not defend every territory in the world, and NATO does not defend Ukrainian territory or Georgian territory for that matter.
What will be the greatest challenge of the NATO during the upcoming decade?
Had we been here 5 weeks, 6 weeks ago, before Putin started his land grab in Ukraine, I would have said that it's important for NATO, which it is, still is, to enter into important partnerships on a global scale with Australia, with New Zealand, with like-minded countries, countries sharing the same values, countries who participated in the NATO operation in Afghanistan. Not developing NATO into a global cop, a global policeman, but realizing that NATO, after Afghanistan, could be called upon to act in other parts of the world. Now, I start where I ended in answering your question 5 weeks ago. Because Putin is reshuffling, and that's very serious. I mean, we're talking about a very serious crisis. Putin is reshuffling the European order and indirectly the world order as we knew it after the end of the Cold War.
And what do you think about cyber terrorism since that also?
Well, cyber is one of those challenges which is relatively new, potentially extremely dangerous. Because you can see a tank, you can see an aircraft, a fighter aircraft, you can see a soldier, boots on the ground you can see, armored personal carriers you can see. A cyber attack, you see the consequences, that your systems are paralyzed, your hospitals do not function anymore, your banks do not function anymore, the nation doesn't function anymore. But it is not so easy to establish where does the attack come from, where does it originate. Let's not forget that in the private sector and in the public sector, this is as important. Because huge companies or smaller companies, not only Shell and Unilever, but also other companies should not be paralyzed. So, cyber defense tops the list of priorities for every defense minister and for every cyber expert in the United States private sector, including Secretary Hague in the United States of America.
Thank you for your valuable time and
Pleasure.
your vision.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.